And I'd like to call the meeting of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee to order. Happy New Year, everyone. Looking forward to 2021. And I think, Kate, you're going to begin it by calling the roll.
Yes, roll call for introductions. Jack Darren.
Present.
Sean Wydell.
Here.
Lindsay Burt. Carrie Cragen. Martha Dooley.
Here.
Aaron Dernbaugh.
Present. Good morning.
Elena Grossman. Andrew Hawkins.
Here.
Paul May. Stacy Myers.
Good morning.
Ted Penesis.
Good morning.
Tom Rickert.
Here.
Vanessa Ruiz. And Deborah Stone.
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Got an announcement here to make pursuant to the Open Meetings Act. And just to point out that as permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of November 13th, 2020, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. And to ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, we posted the meeting materials approximately a week in advance, and we will provide a recording of this meeting linked on CMAP's website, and we will take all votes by a roll call. Hopefully that's clear. Are there any changes to the agenda? People seeing the agenda?
No changes and no announcements.
No changes and no announcements. So thanks. I see everybody who's not speaking is muted. If folks could keep that practice going, that would be great. And if you make a motion, please identify yourself when you do so. With that, I think we could move on to, we would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of our November meeting.
Motion. This is Martha Dooley. Motion to approve the minutes.
Sean Wydell, second.
Thank you, Martha and Sean. Any comments? We will have a vote on that motion, and I guess Kate will call the roll.
Jack Darren.
Yes.
Sean Wydell.
Yes.
Lindsay Burt. Carrie Cragen.
Yes.
Martha Dooley.
Yes.
Aaron Dernbaugh.
Yes.
Elena Grossman. Andrew Hawkins.
Yes.
Paul May.
Yes.
Stacy Myers.
Aye.
Ted Penesis.
Aye.
Tom Rickert.
Aye.
Vanessa Ruiz. Deborah Stone.
Aye.
All right, the motion carries and those minutes are approved. So next, we're pleased to have Aaron Edelman with us. Happy New Year, Aaron. And I think you have an update from the board for us.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. Thanks for giving me a few minutes to share some updates from CMAP. First, I just wanted to recognize and thank Mike Warner. I know he's not here today, but for his leadership over the years with the committee. I know many of you worked with Mike closely throughout his career in the public sector, and appreciate and respect his insights and expertise. So we appreciate that he was always willing to contribute to the work at the agency, the work across the region, to Onto 2050. And for that, we just wanted to verbally recognize him at this meeting and start off with that. So, you know, one of the reasons why I'm here and one of my priorities for this year is to strengthen the communications channels between CMAP and our committee structure. So we really want to leverage your expertise and experience by folding it into our work and vice versa, and keep you informed of the projects that we're working on at a greater level so that you can help inform those processes as they begin to unfold. So with that in mind, I wanted to share a little bit about a couple projects that we're spearheading that we've been talking with our board and our policy committee members that might be of interest. So first, we have been convening a regional economic recovery task force. We assembled this task force at the request of the region's 7 county board chairs and the city of Chicago. The task force is co-chaired by myself and Paul Goodrich, who represents the City of Chicago's COVID-19 task force in Choose Chicago. So the city had done this whole planning effort to get ahead of some of the recovery issues that were going to need to be discussed. And part of that was a recognition that there was an important regional role to play. And so we're really pleased to be at the table and bringing our expertise and our ability to bring stakeholders together to this process. So we kicked this off in November, and there are 3 working groups. One's focused on economic development, another's focused on workforce, and the third one's focused on tourism. So the groups met in November and early December, and we'll continue to meet with them throughout this year to identify some immediate and some long-term actions for the region. Transportation is really the thread that runs through each of these 3 areas. Economic development, where those businesses choose to locate, workforce, how people get to where they need to go, and tourism, how people get to those assets that we have across our region that we know that we all love and appreciate during these times. We really think that bringing together the city and suburban leaders and experts and advisors are going to help us agree on a couple priorities, collaborate on solutions, and speak as one collective voice. So while we don't have sort of a vision for exactly what we're going to come out with, I could imagine there could be grant opportunities from the federal level. There could be opportunities to identify policy barriers at the state level that a coordinated group of civic leaders and business people combined with government could work to tackle on their own. Or there could be some opportunities for us to leverage our existing resources towards, shared messaging on reopening strategies. So that's where that is. And please feel free to interrupt or put questions in the chat if you have any questions. But just a couple other things I wanted to touch on too. In addition to working on sort of the economic and workforce and tourism aspects of recovery, we know that transportation recovery is going to be critical as well. And the transit systems and the RTA have been talking about sort of the challenges that they're facing this year without additional revenues, and the way that the transit's funded across our region is something that has put everyone at a disadvantage right now. So not only is it transit going to be a challenge, I think, in terms of recovery, but it's what are the spillover effects as we think about more people driving. We've done such a good job of thinking about how we manage our parking in the region. We know we could be doing better, but congestion across the region, right? And the potential for those things to increase are, I think, very real. And so we want to keep that at the forefront and talk about what we need to be doing, what policies we need to be putting in place as a region, and strategies and actions we need to take to not just fix the challenges that we think are on the horizon, but also address some of those longstanding challenges that we knew existed prior to COVID. So, for instance, how we fund transit might be one of those things that we would like to come out of this with a better lens and a better formula for. So that project is going to kick off this month. We'll be talking at the board meeting and our policy committee meeting, gathering some feedback. But again, we have a consultant on board to assist us in sort of analyzing and bringing in best practices from across the country and across the world, really. Some of the other things that we've been focused on too is service sharing. So, as the pandemic has cut into everyone's revenue sources, more communities are looking at service sharing. I know that Brian Daly has been intimately involved in working with McHenry County on service sharing. And, this stuff can be really basic, but something that if you aren't intentional about just goes by the wayside as a good idea. So to help municipalities explore these options, we held a CMAP Talks webinar late last year with staff from Oswego, Buffalo Grove, and Berkeley to share best practices. We can certainly share a link to the recording with you all, but I know that this is something that we will continue to talk about moving forward throughout the year. And then just lastly, I wanted to share that we really want to continue to promote ON2 2050 recommendations and to get our message out in the media. So I just wanted to share a couple examples of what we've been doing that might be of interest. So we had an op-ed placed in Cranes that was co-authored by myself and Arnold Randall, the superintendent of the Cook County Forest Preserves, on promoting equitable access to parks. I think this committee probably is aware that only 25% of residents live near parks and open space in some parts of our region, and more affluent areas in our region have over 50% access to parks. And so Onto 2050 has an explicit goal of increasing access to parks to about 65%. Now, granted, we all realize it's a little bit different depending on where you're located, but we think that's achievable, and we think we can intentionally continue to highlight the need for equitable access to parks and recreation across our region. And if we aren't doing that now, what other time should we be doing that? So, and then, if there are other opportunities for us to be collaborating with you on your work to lift up the activities that you have going on, we would certainly look forward to doing so. But I just wanted to thank you for having me. I am happy to discuss any of the things that I talked about or answer any questions that you might have. I'd love to continue to come to our committees and make sure that we're threading that through line between our board and our coordinating committee and you all.
Thanks. It's great to have you here whenever your schedule allows. Folks have any questions about Erin's report?
Jack, there's a question that Stacy put in the chat. Stacy, did you want to raise it or have me read it?
Yes, please. So it's exciting to hear about what you're doing regarding tourism, and the nexus with transportation is so critical. It is with all land use, right? I mean, it's basically one of the most indelible marks that we have in the landscape, and essential for everything. So I was wondering, with the tourism aspects, how much the conservation districts, the forest preserve districts, and then agencies like U.S. Forest Service and U.S. Fish were involved in that discussion, since that's a huge amount of our potential tourism, especially with the access issues that we're really working on. And then what roles can the nonprofits play to be able to integrate assistance into the aspects of tourism in what you're looking at?
Yeah, great question, Stacy, and it's something that we continue to bring. So right now at the table, we have a number of the visitor and convention bureaus from across the region, the Illinois Restaurant Association. We've been talking about how to bring in this conservation lens as well. So I think your suggestions on who might be good participants are really helpful, because I think one of the conversations that we've been having is, I've got Cook County commissioners who are like, I want to send my residents someplace, but I don't know where they should go in DuPage or in Lake. We know these things are here. And so I think, to the extent that we can continue to lift up the opportunities that exist and then find ways to fund, maybe that is catalytic for funding investments that we already know we want to make in this region. So it's top of mind for me as we've been having these conversations. We haven't quite gotten there, but I would imagine in the next month or two, we'll be inviting more people to the table.
Cook County Land Bank Authority also tied into everything else as far as looking at maximizing tourism in and of itself, and then also through the conservation angle may be of value.
Thanks, Stacy.
I'm so interested.
Good. No, I appreciate that, because I think, if as we look out to this year, unfortunately, it's going to be a while before I think things return to normal, but thinking about how tourism might be hyper-local or sub-regional, right? And we've got so much to offer to people in this region. So, Stacy, I'll follow up with you.
Okay.
Thank you for the
Anyone
time
else?
this morning.
Indeed. Great to see you. Okay. Next, we need to talk. We've got a proposal to change both the date and the nature of our March meeting. Kate?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So yes, we are proposing to change the date of our March 4th meeting. And this would allow for a joint meeting with CMAP's Economic Development Committee. I know that in the past, ENR, I believe, maybe had a joint meeting with Land Use Committee at the time, perhaps some other committees in the past. And this really stems from our climate work and discussions with you all with regards to the need to further develop strategies to achieve a low carbon economy and a resilient region. And at the same time, we've heard interest from the Economic Development Committee in terms of being more involved in CMAP's climate work. So we're proposing that this meeting take place, it would be a Monday, March 22nd, still at 9:30 until about 11:30 a.m. And we're requesting committee approval for this change. And I'll just note as well that the calendar invites that have already been sent out do include this meeting for the March 22nd date. So you've already received that, but certainly looking for approval before we solidify that.
Move.
Moved by Stacy. Was that a motion, Stacy?
Yes. Motion.
Great.
I make a motion.
Thank you.
Second by Aaron.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions or comments? If not,
I think I'll do a roll.
We call the roll. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Sorry. Jack Darren,
Aye.
Sean Wydell,
Yes.
Lindsay Burt, Carrie Cragen,
Aye.
Martha Dooley.
Yes.
Aaron Dernbaugh,
Yes.
Elena Grossman,
Yes.
Andrew Hawkins,
Yes.
Paul May,
Yes.
Stacy Myers,
Yes.
Ted Penesis,
Yes.
Tom Rickert,
Yes.
Vanessa Ruiz.
Yep.
Deborah Stone.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we
All
will
right,
have a
motion
next
carries. So we will be meeting on March 2nd. Fun to think about spring a little bit. Okay, so next we've been talking quite a bit over the last year about climate and CMAP's role and the idea of GHG emissions from mobile sources. It's come up a lot there, so we've got a presentation from Russ about that today. Welcome.
Okay, so me and my colleague Sarah are going to give this presentation. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is part of the climate mitigation efforts that are contained in the On2 2050 plan. In order to do this work effectively, we need to know where we are at. We need to establish a starting point for greenhouse gases as they relate to transportation and more specifically on-road mobile source emissions, which is an area that CMAP has more influence on than other sectors that emit GHGs. Today's presentation will show where we are at today based on our current transportation system and land use patterns, and is meant to establish a starting point from which we can measure mitigation efforts over time. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sarah, who is going to present this information, and will be available at the end to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Russell, and good morning, everyone. So we want to look at transportation greenhouse gas emissions because of our role in shaping regional transportation, as Russell mentioned, and because of the impact of transportation on our regional emissions. In the 2015 greenhouse gas inventory, transportation was the second largest emission sector, as you can see in this pie chart. On-road emissions make up the vast majority of transportation sector emissions, as seen in the bar chart callout, and are nearly 1/4 of all emissions. So this presentation will focus exclusively on on-road transportation greenhouse gas emissions on the regional scale, region meaning the Illinois portion of the Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin non-attainment area. So next slide. The on-road transportation emissions numbers in the 2015 greenhouse gas inventory, along with all of the numbers in this presentation, come from EPA's Motor Vehicle Emissions Simulator, or MOVES modeling system. So MOVES requires a variety of input files regarding vehicle population, climate, and vehicle activity. The MOVES inputs listed here in green come from our trip-based travel demand model. And this model has its own set of inputs, including socioeconomic data and regional highway and transit networks. We update all of these inputs regularly to reflect new regional projects, shifts in demographics, and shifts in travel behavior. The MOVES model reflects all fuel economy standards finalized as of the model release date. So the numbers in this presentation are from MOVES 2014A, which incorporates the light-duty greenhouse gas emission standards and the heavy-duty greenhouse gas phase 1 emission standards. Over the next year, we'll be transitioning to the newly released MOVES 3, which incorporates a few additional standards for both light and heavy-duty vehicles. We use MOVES in our semi-annual conformity analysis to determine if the Long-Range Transportation Plan or Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP, conforms to applicable emissions budgets before it is approved. As part of this analysis, we also gather information on greenhouse gas emissions, and the following slides will explore greenhouse gas emissions results from previous conformity runs. We also included the greenhouse gas emissions results as an informational item in the most recent conformity memo for the first time, and you can find that on the CMAP website. All right, next slide. So getting into the data, here we are looking at regional greenhouse gas emissions results from the spring 2020 conformity run. We can see that over time, modeled greenhouse gas emissions decreased through 2040, then increased slightly for a total of 24.2 million metric tons CO2 equivalent in 2050. This is a 16% decrease from the 2015 greenhouse gas inventory value. So recall that this is essentially our baseline scenario. It's showing us what regional emissions will look like with our planned transportation improvements, current travel model assumptions, and the emissions regulations captured in MOVES. We're focusing on this baseline data today to better understand it before using it as a starting point for modeling mitigation strategies. One thing that stands out here is the increase from 2040 to 2050. One factor in this increase is that virtually all of the fiscally constrained projects in our current long-range plan onto 2050 have a completion year of 2040 or sooner. So very little capacity is added to the roadway network after 2040 in our model. VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, continues to increase from 2040 to 2050 though, so we're introducing more congestion into the system, and thus more idling, acceleration and deceleration events, and traveling at suboptimal speeds, which increases fuel consumption and thus greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, fuel efficiency improvements in the MOVES model stay constant after 2025 for light-duty vehicles and 2018 for heavy-duty vehicles. All right, so next slide. So the data you just saw was from the spring 2020 conformity run, but we have data for runs from 2016 to 2020. So we can look at how results varied across this time period. Runs in this time period spanned across two comprehensive plan setups, go to 2040 and on to 2050. So we typically don't see shifts at a regional level in the semi-annual conformity runs since few projects have a large regional impact. But with a plan update comes updates to the socioeconomic forecast, travel model, and other MOVES inputs. So in the next slides, we're going to look at results grouped by plan. And next slide. Okay, so here we're looking at greenhouse gas emissions by year for conformity runs grouped by plan. We have go to 2040 in blue and on to 2050 in red. We can see that emissions results are actually mostly consistent between these two plans, even though on to 2050 focused on infill development and transit ridership. Next slide. So we can see the difference in development and mode choice pattern assumptions between those plans here, where we're comparing the annual vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, for conformity runs grouped by plan. Looking at system-wide VMT, we see that total VMT is higher for go to 2040 runs. But even though it's higher, we saw that the emissions results are mostly consistent between the two plans. So VMT is one factor driving greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll look at it in several slides throughout this presentation. But as this example illustrates, it's not the only explanatory variable. Specifically here, in on to 2050, there were changes that caused a small increase in CO2e per mile, one of them being an increase in the percentage of total VMT that came from trucks as opposed to passenger vehicles. So next slide. I just alluded to the importance of different vehicle or source types in analyzing emissions. So it was important that more of the VMT came from trucks in on to 2050 than go to 2040. So let's dig a little deeper into this and consider how different source types contribute to total emissions in a recent conformity run. But first, we'll review the various categories of source types. Okay, so in this analysis, we split out the top 4 source types that contribute most to greenhouse gas emissions. Then the rest are grouped in other. So the top 4 source types here are passenger cars, passenger trucks, and combination long-haul trucks and single-unit long-haul trucks. So the long-haul trucks refer to trucks with primary trip lengths over 200 miles, combination being truck tractors towing at least one trailer, and single unit being single frame trucks that weigh more than 10,000 pounds or dualies. And note the variety of vehicles grouped in other, like commercial trucks, motorcycles, short haul trucks, transit buses, school buses, motorhomes, and refuse trucks. All right, next slide. So here we're looking at, in the top chart, percent of total on-road emissions for each year by source type from the spring conformity run. Recall that total emissions are generally going down over the years, but with this 100% stacked bar chart, we can see how the composition of those emissions by source type varies. And what we see is that over model years, the portion of total emissions from cars and trucks in the blue and red decreases, while the portion of emissions from combination and single unit long haul trucks in the orange and green increases. VMT information is in the bottom chart. The VMT split by source stays relatively consistent over time, so this bar represents an average year. As you can see, the majority of regional VMT comes from passenger cars and trucks, and combination long-haul trucks in the orange have an outsized emissions contribution for their VMT contribution. This reflects their different emissions profiles. Next slide. So we can also look at how emissions are spread across different facility or road types. Next slide. So this is set up similar to the last analysis. In the top graph, we're showing percent total emissions by year, this time split out by road type. So no surprises here. The majority of emissions in our region occur on urban roads, which are in the dark and light blue. But if we pull on the VMT information on the bottom, we notice that though urban restricted roads, which refers to freeways and expressways in the light blue, have less contribution to total VMT than urban unrestricted roads in the dark blue, which are our arterials and local streets. The restricted facilities actually make up a slightly greater percentage of total emissions, likely pointing to the fact that most truck travel occurs on these roads. Next slide. Okay, so far we've been looking at annual totals, but we can also look at monthly, daily, and hourly emissions. The travel model, that is one of the inputs to the MOVES model, as you'll recall, produces results for an average weekday. So to get these other timescales, we use vehicle count data from IDOT to scale the data appropriately. And just a reminder that as we break down the regional data into finer pieces, the uncertainty around the data points grows. Next slide. To start with months, here we're looking at 2050 emissions by month by source type for the June 2020 conformity run. We see that combination long-haul truck emissions in orange peak in August through November, which is also the time of year with the most long-haul truck VMT. Passenger car emissions in the light blue peak in May through July, which is also the time of year with the most passenger car VMT. Aside from changes in activity, a factor in monthly emissions changes is the weather. So depending on the pollutant, there can be an increase in emissions at low temperature associated with cold starts and or at high temperatures associated with AC usage. Next slide. So now looking at day type, there are two day types in the model, weekday and weekend. So first, comparing total emissions for these day types, weekend emissions are 38.5% lower than weekday emissions. Looking at percent total emissions for a 2050 July day by source type for each day type on the right, we see that trucks in the green and orange make up a reduced portion of daily emissions on the weekend. Trucks also have a greater reduction in weekend VMT than passenger vehicles. Weekend VMT for trucks goes down 62%, whereas for passenger vehicles, the weekend VMT goes down 26%. And next slide. Finally, looking at the hourly timescale, here we're looking at emissions by source by hour for a July weekday in 2050. We see here that passenger vehicle emissions in the red and light blue peak during the AM and PM peak travel periods, which are shaded in light gray. Combination long-haul trucks in the orange keep emissions productions high throughout between the peak travel periods and have higher emissions output than any other source during the overnight periods. And finally, next slide. As mentioned earlier, moves can support analysis for a wide variety of pollutants, so we can gather background data and conduct similar analyses on any of these pollutants. And next slide, here's one way to look at data for some of these other pollutants. Here we're looking at percent total emissions for various pollutants by source type for a 2050 July weekday. Passenger cars and trucks are grouped together in the light blue, and single unit and combination long-haul trucks are grouped together in orange for a simpler view here. The takeaway is that each pollutant has a different emission source composition. You'll see that trucks, again in orange, are major sources of methane, oxides of nitrogen, and exhaust particulate matter, while passenger vehicles in the light blue are the top sources of brake and tire particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, and nitrous oxide. CO2e, which is what we've been looking at this entire presentation, is shown for reference, and a few individual greenhouse gases that are part of CO2e are labeled with the greenhouse gas tag. So the takeaway here is that we need strategies that target multiple sources if we want to address multiple pollutants. And next slide, importantly, now that we've characterized our current emissions projections, how does that compare with where we want to be? So here's the data you saw on the very first slide, total on-road emissions from the last conformity run in red. And we've added our draft on-road emissions target in blue. And so to emphasize, this is not our official or adopted target, but rather a starting point for how the transportation sector should contribute to achieving our overall regional target, which, to remind you, is 25.7 million metric tons of CO2e or less from all sectors in 2050. And as you can see, the gap between our model and this draft target grows over time. So we need additional actions and changes to reach the target. Next slide. So as Russell, framed this presentation in the beginning, this is really just the beginning. We wanted to develop and characterize this baseline data before using it to model mitigation strategies as part of the Transportation Mitigation Strategies project. We also want to refine the transmission sector target. So the dashed blue line that you saw in the previous slide. We want to work on transitioning to moves 3 so we can make sure that we're capturing the most recent emissions regulations and evolutions in the understanding of emissions production. And we also want to, if possible, look at emissions on different geographic scales than just the region. And next slide. So that is all the information we have for you today. But again, we'd love to hear your questions or comments or thoughts on this presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Russell. Open the floor and the chat to questions or comments.
Hi, Sarah. This is Sean Wynell. Just wondering to what extent moves 3 and other model that you're going to be moving to capture transitions to other fuel sources like electrification of fleets, both for long-haul trucks and passenger vehicles as well, and to what extent that has been captured or can be captured going forward to meet our targets.
Yeah, moves 3 does not mandate, it doesn't by itself include any assumptions about fuel transitions. It really only includes the fuel economy regulations that have been established as of the model release date. But we can do some scenarios using different fuels, and that's, I think, something that we'll definitely want to look at as part of the Transportation Mitigation Strategies project.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Sarah and Russell. Thanks. This is really interesting. I gained a lot from this presentation. The comment I made in the chat was related to slide 18. This is really obviously having the impacts and the users or the sources identified then drives your mitigation strategies and what to prioritize for mitigation. So do you have a similar slide as 18 but with the volumes? I think, I was hoping that there's going to be something back there. I think not all of those pollutants have the same impacts. It's interesting to see the sources of you know, the different types of PM 2.5, but then the actual knowing the contribution to PM 2.5 in total provides locally, and then any of the greenhouse gases provide more globally towards climate change is significant, would be a way to prioritize then which of the mitigation approaches you dive deep in exploring the different scenarios or models. So just an observation.
Yeah, so I think one thing to consider here is not to look at greenhouse gases in a vacuum. And the slide 18 actually is to show that we as a region, we have to be concerned with other pollutants too, because we are in a non-attainment for ozone. We are in attainment for PM 2.5, but it's still something we want to try to improve on. So sometimes there are mitigation strategies that might be beneficial to GHGs, and we want to also see if they're also beneficial to other pollutants, or vice versa. If we are doing something because we're required to do something for ozone, what will be the impact? So that's kind of, in some level, the purpose of this slide is to show there's a whole variety of pollutants that we have to be concerned with. Some of them are more specific to GHG, but sometimes the strategies that the mitigation strategies might overlap and have impacts beyond just the targeted ones, such as ozone or GHG.
Yeah,
so
and I'm
that's
sure
kind of where we're at on that.
And I'm sure for those sort of local pollutants, either for non-attainment or for public health concerns, gets way more complicated as you look at the different slices of where the pollutant is released, the way you did with the different modes.
Well, and not on here, not to cut you off, sorry, but not on here because we don't have any way to control it. But a big influence on the whole thing is weather.
Yeah.
And we don't have the ability to change the weather in the future, today, or even the next 5 minutes. So that's out of our control, but it does have a large impact on how much of each of these pollutants kind of is captured in the region. And you know, modeling is an exercise, so we have to make certain assumptions about what the weather will be like in the future. So that's stuff that we have to work out with our partners, Illinois EPA specifically. So we're all in agreement on what those scenarios look like.
Yeah, hope to see another office at CMAP working on changing the weather. That'd be helpful.
Or not, right? Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you both. Interesting stuff. All right, next we're going to talk about our work plan as a committee for the year, and I think Kate is going to lead us through that discussion.
Yes, thank you. So as we start this new year of committee meetings, Brian and I wanted to give you both a preview of what we have planned for this year, as well as use this opportunity to get some feedback from you to hear on, you know, we're going to be continuing remote meetings far into the future. So it's a good time for us to check in with you all and get some feedback on how things are working. So first, the work plan is really designed for us to meet the committee charge. So this is the latest charge that was revised in 2019 based on your feedback. And there's really two core components of it. First, the committee provides feedback on CMAP's work related to environment and natural resources, of course, to implement onto 2050. And secondly, it serves to coordinate and prioritize policy, programs, and advocacy between CMAP and regional partners and communities. So similar to last year, our meeting agenda items, they'll consider CMAP projects and initiatives that help push forward onto 2050 implementation. And I would say, again, similar to last year, with a focus on climate mitigation and resilience. Several of our meetings last year had either discussion agenda items, presentations like the one Sarah and Russell just gave, and we plan to continue this into the future, given the agency's priorities around climate. And given the focus on climate and some of the vacancies that we have, both Mike Warner and Danielle Gallet who left us early last year, we are looking to fill member vacancies to help broaden the climate expertise that's represented on the committee. See, as far as agency priorities are concerned, as Erin noted, CMAP is also focused on regional recovery, both, well, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this includes potential presentations on the Regional Economic Recovery Task Force that she explained, as well as the transportation recovery efforts that are kicking off pretty soon. Those might be ready to bring to the committee later on in 2021. And then finally, we've identified initiatives in our standard service areas of planning, policy, programming, and communications. This, of course, will include LTA projects, as well as a slew of other things we have going on. And Stacy, I see your comment in the chat that I think we should just respond to now. With how is the nexus of transportation and land use more generally addressed in our work plan? I think I would say that right now we have our individual projects and initiatives called out as specific presentations similar to what we've done in the past. But I guess, would you like to elaborate on that? Because I'm sensing a new idea of potentially presenting different different initiatives together to discuss that nexus a bit more in detail.
Yeah, sure. So I think that, you know, this committee has had the benefit of having projects brought before it, or LTA initiatives brought before it, like the Moving Will County, and I'm grateful for that. And I think that that was great to vet it through, and very important to vet it through this committee as well as others, because of the nexus of land use and transportation. However, these steps a lot of times are reactive rather than fundamental marriage of land use and transportation at the initial policy level. For instance, the freight work, the great freight work that CMAP is doing has not really had truly a nexus with this committee. And I think it really should, because when you're looking at the environmental conditions and the conservation of our open space, and especially when you're looking through the Jedi lens, you invariably are going to have an immense amount of crossover with freight and transportation. I mean, if you think of the Ileana Piatone and North Point all together, and then the crisscross of roads that are either suffering and falling apart and need help, as well as the ones that are being looked at, even in Will County, it's a good example of how, if we would be evolving our regional view of freight and environment and conservation at the same time, we could avoid some of these conflicts up front, maybe.
Great, thank you for that. And I think that we will take a look, yeah, the policy and programming really isn't speaking to some of the transportation projects specifically that we have going on, but we'll certainly look for those opportunities to bring that work to the committee. So in addition to the work that CMAP has going on, you know, in the past, we've also wanted to consider member and partner initiatives that align with On2 2050. And I'll just say that right now, thanks to the discussions we've had with you all last year, as well as discussions with other stakeholders in the region, I'd say we have a pretty good idea of what climate and resilience initiatives are ongoing right now. We could be missing out on some related ones. And so I just wanted to pose the question to you now and in the future. Certainly we can take ideas by email or phone, but if there are any initiatives that come to mind at this moment that we should be considering in terms of presentations that could be made to the committee this year.
think, and Kate, this is Sean. I'm actually haven't been as involved, but I know the city is working on some climate initiatives as well. So I think it would be great to have the chief sustainability officer from the city come to present, to talk about some of the work that the city is working on. I haven't, as I said, haven't been as involved in that, but I think that would be a great presentation for all of us to hear. Hopefully the city can step back into a leadership role in that realm, which we've kind of advocated for on. But
Great, thank you, Sean.
Mhm.
Hi, this is Elena. Just one thought. I'm not quite sure if this technically falls under CMAP's jurisdiction, but maybe to have some sustainability officers from healthcare facilities, since they're a really big contributor, and obviously they've also been highlighted during the pandemic, but to hear what some both large and small healthcare systems are doing to address their sustainability challenges and opportunities.
Great, thank you, Elena. Okay, again, feel free to reach out to Brian and I at any time. I think our previous meetings have been pretty CMAP heavy, this one included. And so we do want to make sure that we're using this venue as an opportunity for us all to learn about some of the other relevant initiatives in the region. And Edith, I see the Chicago Community Trust Corporate Sustainability Group suggested. Thank you for that.
So, a question about the
yes,
about the legislative agenda. What's the thought, given the uncertain nature of the spring session and the fact that we don't meet again until March 22nd? What's the timetable for the legislative agenda development and any input that this team might have?
to help inform the development of the agenda itself?
Well, I guess I forget exactly how you worded it on the slide, but if that was the intent, yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to put, Gordon, I don't know if you're if you're listening, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I don't want to speak out of turn either.
Yeah, I know no one knows about the future, so I hate these questions myself.
So I don't, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So we are right now in the process of developing or presenting the state legislative and federal legislative agendas to our board at the next meeting. At that point in time, they will be discussing what we are presenting, and it's not very much different than what we've presented in the past, to be perfectly honest. And at that point in time, they'll discuss it, and we hope to have it approved at their February meeting. So, you know, next week we'll present it. There'll be opportunities for people to make comment on it, and then we'll move it along for approval in February. Thanks.
Thanks, Gordon. That's very helpful.
And that's the board meeting next week, Gordon. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other comments about the work plan for the year?
Oh, I just had one more item, Jack.
Yep.
No, and this is really, again, either for discussion now or follow up with Brian and I individually. But we have a few of these virtual meetings under our belt. We've been using GoToMeeting, and just wanted to get a rough sense from you all in terms of what's working well or could be improved. We've been on many of these meetings this entire year, essentially. So are there any ideas or methods you've seen used elsewhere that you could look into adapting?
if no one else has a question, I'm curious. One benefit that I've seen in some other spaces that I'm in of being all virtual is how accessible it is to people. And so I'm wondering, are any of the committees seeing any more public attendance or participation with the virtual meetings?
So
this is Andy Hawkins. Yeah, we're not seeing much in the way of public participation. I mean, it's working well to be able to get our boards together. We don't have any issue with not having quorum. So, and then for us, I think that some people had mentioned that they're not even in the state right now, which means they wouldn't be able to participate in this meeting.
yeah, and I would say from speaking with other committee liaisons at CMAP and just from our own experience here, I would say with our committee, we're seeing fewer members of the general public attend. I think if you look at the roster for today's meeting, it's entirely almost entirely either members or CMAP staff, and that's been true for most of the year. And I think that's been true for a lot of our committees as well. I wonder if that has something to do with the kind of lost aspect of the networking people would get from attending committee meetings in person that they don't really get from attending these. I know we would often have some young professionals attend who would like to speak with committee members afterwards. So I don't know what we do to get more public participation, because I agree it seems like it would be more accessible in this format, but for whatever reason that hasn't really taken off.
Yeah, at the same time, we are recording these and posting them. So I think I'd be interested to see how many views they're getting. Difficult to parse out who's CMAP and who's coming from elsewhere, but.
Can I comment real quick here too?
Yeah.
So I get to sit on lots of other committees, and the public aspect certainly is waned a little bit. It wasn't super strong to begin with. Let's be honest about that. But the amount of people who are engaged in the topics, i.e. committee members, not just at CMAP, but in all kinds of local meetings that I see, council meetings and what have you, is vastly increased. So where you would struggle sometimes to get a quorum, you now have very high attendance from all the members, or they were able to send in a surrogate or somebody like that. So the public part hasn't worked maybe as well, but participation throughout the region by policymakers and decision makers and stuff, I would say has increased significantly in what I have seen in all kinds of meetings. Now, I know IDOT has struggled because they have lots of transportation projects that have to go through public hearings and stuff like that. They've actually developed an online virtual public involvement plan that projects have to go through. And that has been somewhat successful for some projects. So there are kind of small examples out there where they make a lot of community engagement and get it, e-blasted from the local municipalities or whatever. But these kinds of meetings in the public, probably not quite as good. So just, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I would agree with, for example, with CDOT, some topic-specific meetings that we've had, like we had one on when we wrapped up the e-scooter pilot, and we held the meeting on December 22nd, a couple days before the holiday break for most people, and we still had 85 people come because it's certainly a polarizing subject, but people showed up virtually. We used Zoom to do that meeting, so I think that's part of it too. Is like really topic that people feel passionate about, and scooters were certainly one of them, is something that drew people into. And again, we had 85 people, which when we did regular, normal, in-person engagement last year for the first scooter pilot, we had maybe 30 or 40 people at the most. So I think it actually increased our attendance for some of those things, for some of the work that we did.
Yeah, thank you for that. Any other ideas that anyone wants to share now? And again, we can also talk offline as well. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Kate. So for our next couple of topics, we're going to turn to the Fox River Watershed, starting in the north with Kelsey Pudlock and the Fox River Corridor Plan up from Burton's Bridge to Johnsburg. Kelsey?
Thanks, Jack, and hello, everyone. I'll be giving an overview of the Fox River Corridor Plan that CMAP's been developing in partnership with McHenry County and the City of McHenry. So first off, I'd like to highlight why we develop river corridor plans. This type of plan is a multi-jurisdictional planning effort that brings together a wide range of stakeholders to build on existing plans and initiatives and really create a shared vision for the waterway and its surrounding communities. It outlines actions to meet common goals, strengthening connections across multiple jurisdictions and people that have a stake in the future of the river. And it most importantly helps stakeholders set priorities, coordinate decision-making, and obtain future grants for funding. So the Fox River is ecologically and economically important to the region. It's a defining characteristic that's shared by multiple communities and counties. So recognizing the need for unified vision, McHenry County and the City of McHenry, in partnership with CMAP, has set out to develop this plan for the Fox River and its communities from Burns Bridge to Johnsburg before reaching the chain of lakes. So as we develop this plan, it will be comprehensive in scope and focusing on a number of topics: commerce along the riverfront, environmental quality and water resources, parks and recreation, as well as access and transportation connections to, from, and across the river. And in many ways, this is really a continuation of a broader multi-jurisdictional planning effort. Next slide, please. The Algonquin and Carpentersville worked with CMAP to develop a corridor plan that focused on their downtown areas, as well as the river and the natural areas between them. Building on the success of that plan, which was adopted in 2016, McHenry County applied to the LTA program to extend this work upstream, which resulted in another corridor plan from Fox Bluff to Burton's Bridge. So that's where Burton's Bridge is where this project starts. So and is extending it further to the north. In 2018, McHenry County, alongside the City of McHenry, applied to the LTA program to continue the planning effort up to Johnsburg. Their application was accepted in 2019, and we began, or 2018, and then we began working with the county and the city in late 2019. Next slide, please. So the steering committee is similar to the previous plans committee, but it is tailored to include communities and organizations that are unique to the area. And this area in particular has a heavy presence with folks that enjoy boating along the river, so that we made sure that their representation is also here on the committee. So the study area for the planning area spans approximately 8 miles, starting again from Burton's Bridge at Route 176 to Johnsburg at roughly North Chapel Hill Road. It encompasses a quarter-mile buffer surrounding the river, as well as the connected open space, floodplains, and wetlands. And so within this boundary, we have parts of Holiday Hills, Prairie Grove, Johnsburg, as well as the City of McHenry, unincorporated areas, and a significant amount of protected open space. And to give you an idea of where we've been and where we're at now, that's fun. Here's a timeline of the planning process. The project formally kicked off in December of 2019, and within the first couple of months, we formed the steering committee and introduced everyone to the project. From there, the existing conditions phase was a little slow to start as we were all kind of starting to work from home, but it picked up in April of last year. From here, the project team spent most of the summer interviewing stakeholders and conducting research, and then we began more of the public-facing engagement in the fall. By December, we had the existing conditions report drafted, and at this point, we're in January now, and we're finalizing the report and transitioning into the visioning and plan development phase, with our eye on having the plan drafted and ready for adoption by the end of June. So I want to give a brief overview of the report, but before I do, this is a kind of a snapshot of the community outreach efforts that we've conducted thus far. As I mentioned, the summer we spent a lot of time conducting stakeholder interviews. So this included interviewing nearly all steering committee members as well as other key stakeholders that were identified by the committee. We then launched a couple of online surveys to gather public input on key issues and opportunities. And then these surveys were followed by 2 virtual open houses that gave the public another avenue to provide input on the existing conditions. And there are some common themes that emerged from this work. We heard that the plan should really focus on increasing coordination among stakeholders within the corridor. And on a related note, there was a call for improved stormwater management and flood control, as well as an interest in finding a balance between environmental stewardship and recreational use of the corridor. Additionally, we heard that there's potential for the local economy to be stronger, but this should be done with a focus on making improvements and building on the existing assets that are there first. So all of these findings are reflected within the existing conditions report. And so next slide, please. Well, okay, so this looks like the slide's a little off, but the report provides an overview of the current conditions within the corridor and conveys key issues and opportunities that have emerged from our research analysis and public input that we've gathered thus far. So it really begins with identifying, it also identifies key themes that we should consider as we develop the plan. So I'd like to run through some of these issues and opportunities and touch on a couple of the relevant themes. So for economic development, we saw here that there is a lot of untapped potential to spur economic activity. The Fox River and its surrounding spaces already attract a wide range of visitors and generate business. People enjoy restaurants along the river in McHenry. There's opportunities to explore Moraine Hill State Park, and boating on the river itself is a huge draw for many. So there are all of these activities, but there's certainly some room to expand customer bases among businesses and promote greater movement among these user groups throughout the corridor. At the same time, McHenry County and Johnsburg are reinvesting in their downtowns through pedestrian improvements as well as prospects of new development. However, we acknowledge that these reinvestment efforts may be hindered by the impacts of the pandemic. So with that being said, we think that there's some benefit for the plan to explore how to leverage existing marketing resources from Visit McHenry County as well as the McHenry Area Chamber of Commerce to promote local tourism. So this sort of falls nicely aligned with some of the information that Aaron shared earlier this morning. And we also think that there's room for guidance on riverfront design and development standards. So in the event that development does occur, establishing best practices for riverine buffers and in-stream habitat could be of use. So thinking and moving on to flooding and water resources management, stakeholders voice that flooding is one of the greatest concerns for residents, businesses, and users within the corridor. Due to the study area's location within a much larger river system, it's quite low-lying flat topography, and so the upstream precipitation can really cause significant riverine flooding. We also found that 40% of the floodplains within the study area have been developed, so this further exacerbates these issues and puts people in harm's way. We also found that riverfront management is becoming progressively more challenging given the complex relationship between ongoing sediment issues within the area, flooding again, climate change, and this demand for water-based recreation. So there's a lot of things going on and need for improvement of the overall management of the system at large. And on top of all of this, there's a lot of just public speculation and confusion about how the river is managed. So we we know that we can't tackle regional flooding and sedimentation within this plan alone, but we can outline steps that both the county, municipalities, and landowners can take. So some of these opportunities could be investing in local and countywide stormwater management measures, getting more specific on dredging needs within the corridor, strategies for improving communication and education about river management and how the Stratton Dam, which is located within the study area, is being operated, as well as examining how stakeholders can really work together to advocate for additional financial resources to support improved river management. And so from the water quality side of things, we also found that water pollution affects aquatic life and can limit some recreational activities such as fishing and water sports. The presence of Stratton Dam alongside dredging and the channelization have altered the natural flow and composition of the river so much to a point that's really diminished its ability to support habitat and or habitat for a variety of aquatic species, both in and in-stream and then outside of it as well. So at the same time, we also have mercury, PCBs, and fecal coliform as some major pollutants that are within the Fox. And so these can have adverse health effects on humans, as well as negative impacts again on fishing and water recreation. Although it wasn't a major topic of discussion within our outreach efforts in particular, we through our research, we did find that groundwater contamination is a threat to the corridor's water supply. Throughout this study area, there are a lot of shallow aquifers that are in close proximity to the surface that are relied on, that provide water to many of the communities. And so this makes them highly susceptible to contamination, drought, and their loss of their ability to recharge. So like many areas within the Chicago region, chlorides is a particular concern and a major threat to the groundwater wells for both private and communities. So despite the number of related issues that I've identified thus far to water resources, there are a lot of citizen groups that are working towards improving and protecting water resources within the corridor. So we see this as an opportunity to really leverage existing resources and partnerships to minimize flooding, advance water quality improvements, as well as promote water resource education, stewardship, and advocacy. For open space and habitat, we found, a huge opportunity is really the importance of the ecosystem services that the corridor provides and its extensive open space network. Through our research, we found that roughly 3,000 acres of wetlands are within this area and can really help with flood control, water quality improvement, and aquifer recharge. So, excuse me, with flooding being a major concern for stakeholders, we see restoration enhancement of wetlands as really a big opportunity for helping address and mitigate flooding. So while protected areas throughout the corridor do provide habitat for a wide range of species, ongoing management and restoration challenges have been heightened by the COVID pandemic. We heard that it has already been challenging before the pandemic had occurred, but is becoming more and more challenging for land managers to accommodate and tackle invasive species management, as well as habitat fragmentation. So these are things that, as we develop the plan, we'll need to look into in greater detail. But similar to the Water Resources Network, there is a handful of stakeholders in this area that are dedicated to protecting the river and the surrounding areas. So I think we'll really want to tap those existing resources and look for ways to creatively protect natural areas while dealing with constrained resources, specifically from a financial and labor standpoint. So for recreation, really, this is one of the main attractions that draw people to the study area throughout. And throughout our research, we learned that there's interest in improving on existing amenities, as well as possibly expanding upon those that currently exist. That being said, there were some safety concerns that were brought up among all river users. So we really see here that increasing safety is really important. So if we look to diversify recreational amenities or provide additional access, the safety component will need to be addressed and really focused on alongside that. So similar to other opportunities identified in the economic development section, we found that recreational amenities could benefit from a coordinated marketing and communication strategy. In addition to promoting local tourism, it could also provide a cohesive framework for under compiling information into one cohesive area. There's a lot of different websites and places that people can go to figure out how to go about, whether it be kayaking or boating in the area. And so really having a communal space for everything would be really useful for all users of the river and people within the corridor. And something that we touched on in the water resources section, but we felt that it was worth mentioning in the recreation chapter. Really, sedimentation is a limitation to motorized boating, and motorized boating is a really popular activity in this area. So we want to make sure that we address that to the fullest extent possible. And with regards to access and connectivity, we found that there are opportunities to strengthen the connections between the local trail system and the regional network. Currently, there are a lot of the trails in the corridor are contained within recreational areas. So people really want to see these trails connected to the regional system, and particularly the Prairie Trail, which is in close proximity to Marine Hill State Park and some other local trails in the study area. And so really some of these connections have been planned already. It's just a matter of bringing them to fruition. So we think that the plan can help with that. And another opportunity is the fact that the area is improving its safety and circulation. There are a handful of capital improvement projects within the city of McHenry, as well as Johnsburg, that are really aimed at modernizing roads and improving pedestrian activity and bike safety to get people moving from one community to the next and bringing people closer to the water. So as much as we can support these efforts and continue to improve the circulation within the corridor, that's something that we hope the plan can address as well. And looking, that's moving across the corridor, but as we focus on the water itself, we found that there is some limitation to access, and particularly public access to the river. Much of the land is privately owned or inaccessible due to marshy conditions or overgrowth. So for those without private access, public access points are really difficult to find. And so there's interest to increase this access, but we think that, again, we should be focusing on making improvements to existing points. Some mentioned that they just weren't aware of existing public points. So making people aware of what's available before really expanding and exploring new points will be important to take into consideration. And then another issue that stood out to us with regard to access and connectivity is the access to public transportation in the area is fairly limited. We know that there's connections there, that Metro serves the area as well as PACE, but if the corridor is really looking to boost tourism, the plan may want to consider bolstering transportation on the weekends in order to provide more of equitable access and attract more visitors to the area. So that wraps up the existing conditions report. So I'd like to open it up to a discussion now. These were some questions that I've posed to the steering committee, and I'd like to pose them to all of you here, with the first one being, are there any particular issues and opportunities that I've identified that we should prioritize as we work towards the plan's development.
Thoughts?
Hi, this is Aaron. I didn't hear it referred to, but maybe it was and I missed it. But how does the plan, or how did the approach to this project, and this probably is more of a general comment to CMAP projects, but I was thinking about it related to the river and the flooding that you identified. How does it incorporate sort of future climate scenarios? And was there any sort of future potential variability that was identified or incorporated?
So we haven't incorporated any future climate scenarios, but we do take a look at CMAP's flood susceptibility index, highlighting areas where flooding is more likely or more prone to occur. So in the previous plan, I would say we had a separate grant through NOAA to look at how to incorporate climate science into the plan. And then we would like to carry that over to some extent within this plan. It's not, we don't have the funding to do kind of like the full scoop or scope of it, but I think there's certainly room to look at more like broader regional climate scenarios and try to make some assumptions or scaling to the local level. Thanks for that question.
So this is Martha Dooley from Schaumburg. I have some comments about the connectivity here, and I see that some of these trails are planned and programmed. Is there any idea as to what timelines there are for those? Because I think this is a major hurdle, you know, to get to some of these natural areas. I used to live out in this area, and the lack of connectivity is a big deal as far as like bike trails and things like that go.
Yeah, so that map was pulled from our CMAP's Trails and Greenways data set. So we can look at relative timelines that were identified within that. I do know that a few of them are in the process of, I would say, are kind of being planned, and if funding can be found, implementation can happen relatively soon. So there is some, I guess there's some opportunity there, but yeah, for those that are planned for, you know, out into the future, they may be a little more harder to address and include in the plan.
Yeah, I can chime in on that one since I was involved in the regional greenways and trails plan. Without speaking to the specific trails in this area, basically a trail is included in the regional greenways and trails plan as planned if it appears in a planning document that's been adopted by an implementer. So that may not mean that any funding has been set aside. A planned trail could be quite a ways away, whereas the programmed trails have actually, you know, been programmed to receive funding. So there's a pretty wide range of status between different trails that are listed in that category.
Yeah, and I would also say that McHenry County's, I believe their Council of Mayors are working on a bike plan right now. So there could be additional movement for some of the smaller trail connections to just move implementation one step closer to a reality.
Thank you.
I guess I would just pose the second question is how can this plan look into the future while also responding to the impacts of the pandemic? We recognize that there are a handful of issues that need to it seems like that they should be addressed before tackling economic development. But that being said, economic development can have a role in where we're currently at as we are dealing with the pandemic and moving out of it. And as Aaron mentioned, trying to figure out how to promote local or hyper-local tourism. So we see that there's a need to address these things that are a little more specific or tailored, but also want to be planning 10 years out from now and not let that necessarily limit ourselves as well. Well, I guess, yeah, if there's no one else with any comments or questions on the existing conditions report, I just wanted to briefly go over a few next steps. So we'll be finalizing the report in the next week or two, and then we'll be hosting a couple of visioning workshops January 19th and the 21st. And after that, we'll be working on the key recommendations memo and then starting the draft plan. So I wanted to pose a couple of other questions to you with regard to our engagement opportunities. Right now, as we head into the envisioning and plan development phase, we've posted another survey, this one's specific to the visioning. And then we have the workshops, but beyond that, once we head into the plan development, we don't have a lot of communication with the public at that point. So with education being a key component to some of the topic areas that I discussed earlier, I wanted to pose the question of how can education play a role in our engagement efforts within the planning process itself, and if there are strategies that you have seen in previous plans that may have incorporated an education component into the planning process that's a little more substantial than just providing education on or information on a particular topic. No questions or no ideas?
I have a question. So, and I don't know why I'm so tied into the bike trails out here. Probably because I used to bike out there so much. But so in the list of the organizations that are involved in the planning process and the existing conditions report and so on, are the local bike clubs involved in that at all? Or you might have a municipal bikeway committee or something?
We don't have any bike clubs in particular. We do have the McHenry County Bicycle Advocates.
Okay.
So they're kind of like a all-encompassing group of, I think, a lot of folks that are promoting a lot of bicycling within the area.
Okay, thanks. I'll stop now.
Well, this is something, the education thing is something that we've sort of been playing around with, and I think it would be an opportunity with how we're sort of conducting public engagement right now in the virtual environment, how we might be able to provide just some additional level of education on some of the topic areas that will be covered in the plan, and that can kind of tee us up well for making people comfortable and familiar with concepts that will then be addressed within the plan itself. So we'll explore that further, but that's about it, and thank you for your time.
I've got a quick comment, I guess, on the education aspect. Now, I feel like quite often we see our policymakers come and go pretty quickly. They're around for 2 or 4 or 6 years, and a lot of these plans end up being a one-time effort, and they're adopted and often forgot about. And I think just working with some of the various stakeholders and making sure that as we track some of these projects that CMAP's working on, that we try to reinvigorate, or we bring them to light every once in a while, and that can easily be done through the various agencies where we just say or ask for a commitment that they re-educate new board members, new committee members, that kind of stuff. I don't know if that's answering your question, but I do feel education is a primary component to really affecting policy, and so I just encourage that.
Yeah, you make a good point. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. Folks, I apologize. I've got to jump for an 11 o'clock, so I'm going to miss our next presentation about the Indian Creek Plan. But Sean, are you able to take us through the rest of the agenda?
Yes, no problem, Jack.
Awesome. Thanks. I'll see you all in March, if not before.
Thanks, Jack. All right. Next up, we've got Holly to talk about the Indian Creek Watershed Plan.
Yes, good morning, everybody, and Happy New Year. So here's a little a winter view of Indian Creek as we're looking westward near the mouth of Indian Creek as it enters the Fox River in Aurora, Illinois. So I'm just going to provide today just a brief overview of our Indian Creek Watershed Plan to date, kind of some of the background of watershed planning, why Indian Creek, and then similar to Kelsey and even for this, Kate asked for this committee, or thinking caps on, and again, how to best some ideas that have worked for you in engaging the public and getting input during these days when we're meeting virtually. So we can go to the next slide. So I know this committee all knows what a watershed is, but when I talk about watershed plans, I always like to set the stage with what is a watershed. Of course, we know that's that area of land around a lake or a river or a stream, a pond, some point on the landscape, and that area that drains to that water body, defined by the topography of the area, and of course sometimes that can be changed by man-made, our stormwater management structures can sometimes change the way the water flows off the landscape. But generally, this is the kind of the planning piece, the planning area that we're looking at when we're talking about watershed planning, that area that drains to a specific spot on the landscape. Thank you. And why does CMAP get involved in watershed planning? Again, well, I guess it obviously goes back to the Clean Water Act and our position as the designated area-wide water quality management planning agency for the 7-county CMAP region. There's certain sections of the Clean Water Act that talk about, we're having for aquatic life, for recreation, and for drinking water health and safety. And part of that one of the sections is section 319, the non-point source management program, which from which, like, one of the main carrots of a watershed plan is by doing one and meeting the 9 minimum elements that are outlined by US EPA. That plan is now projects are identified in the plan are eligible for grant funding through the non-point source program. And again, as a regional planning agency, we are the designated area-wide water quality management planning agency. Watershed planning is supported through our comprehensive regional plans. certainly on starting with Go to 2040, now on to 2050, as well as Water 2050. And through our watershed plans, we also like to support local planning, whether it's county, municipal, forest preserve, whatever type, whoever is involved, the stakeholders within that watershed. We want to be able to support their initiatives as well and try to incorporate those into the plan, into watershed plans as best we can. So why Indian Creek right now? So you can see Indian Creek, so the little yellow on this map are plans that are underway by various organizations. The green ones are those that have been completed. Some are green with yellow cross-hatching, so they're undergoing updates right now. CMAP has done quite a few of these plans, but certainly Lake County SMC has done, of course, many of them, most of them in Lake County. Other consulting firms have done several. So we're pretty well painted green across the region with some gaps to fill in over time. So hopefully we'll get to those in the next decade or so. Okay, next slide. Go back one. So these are the 9 minimum elements. You can read all about them, but basically what the watershed plans do is you're like, what is the condition of the watershed? Why is it this way? And then what can be done to protect and improve water quality? And what's your plan for attack, so to speak? So, and then how do you keep track of that over time? So similar to many of our local technical assistance projects, next slide, please. Well, let me back up. So the focus of watershed-based plans are non-point source pollution. So that diffuse pollution that runs off the landscape, falls from the atmosphere, and impacts our water bodies. And so we often focus on those impaired. Usually watershed plans are done around impaired water resources, but sometimes we've been involved in watershed plans where an impairment of a stream may not be there, has been identified by Illinois EPA through their water monitoring. But we certainly want to protect those waters. And oftentimes, for example, Boone Creek, you won't see an impairment listed in EPA's 305B report, but the Fox River downstream is impaired. So certainly as we protect our tributary and headwater streams, that certainly provides a benefit to our downstream waters as well. Again, we want to make watershed plans work for a variety of applications, not just the non-point source management program. We hope they can be used for other grant programs. So if open space and habitat protection is important to the communities, we certainly will identify some of those things as well. Flood control, even flood control does have, Illinois EPA starting to recognize and has recognized flood control practices, stormwater management practices do have a water quality benefit to them. Water supply can be touched on as well. And we try to, as a planning agency, also look at policy and planning avenues, including things like smart growth, again, to reduce the pollutant loads off the landscape and try to look at those types of things. Watershed planning is an iterative process. It's collaborative. We're always building partnerships at the beginning, trying to bring in a wide variety of folks who live, work, and play, have an interest in that watershed. Characterizing the watershed, similar just to the ECR that Kelsey mentioned for our Fox River Corridor plan. It's probably a ECR on steroids. There's quite a bit of information that goes into the watershed resource inventory, and then working with the stakeholders to set goals and identify those solutions, putting that excuse me, implementation plan together. And then we hope, there's a champion then that the most successful watershed plans do have someone who is, you might say, a champion. Maybe that's a local watershed group. Maybe it's a municipality or a county or a combination of those that then, champions that plan, gets people to continue to think about it and work to implement the recommendations of the plan, whether through its Sometimes through CMAP's LTA program, we've done some comprehensive plan updates and zoning code reviews and updates that have been recommendations of watershed plans, as well as those on-the-ground best management practices. You know, the retrofitting the built environment, for example, in certain ways for green stormwater management. These plans, watershed plans are kind of considered like on a 10-year cycle. So it's good to certainly have a formal kind of sit down and look back and do an inventory of where you're at certainly every 10 years, and then update the plan as needed. So this is kind of the outline we've typically used. The watershed resource inventory is a hefty part of the plan. This time with Indian Creek, we're thinking we're going to make that an appendix instead of kind of in the main body of the plan. So it'll be it's kind of more of a reference, so folks can look back to that. And then with the next slide, the section 4, the watershed protection measures, will be more at the front of the plan. Again, with that resource inventory being in the back as more of a reference, because we want that kind of rethinking again, you want these things to be useful, you want them to be used and implemented. And then and I always like to put in a slide with, here's where you can read all about and find out more all about watershed planning. So that's just an FYI there. So where is the Indian Creek watershed is in the lower Fox River Basin. They're straddling DuPage and Kane counties. Primarily in two municipalities. The city of Aurora makes up most of it, with a little bit of Batavia and some unincorporated area. The headwaters are actually in Fermilab, National Laboratory area there. If we go to the next slide, I think there's some other fun facts about the watershed. It's about 16 square miles. Well, Indian Creek itself, that watershed is about 14.5 square miles. What I like to do is is to add some direct drainage areas adjacent, if it makes sense to add some direct drainage areas to the Fox River, because again, CMAP lately has done quite a few plans along in the Fox River watershed, and it was of interest to the advisory team. Seemed it makes sense. There those sub-watersheds, you see 10 and 11 along the Fox River that then go across the river a bit. So those two areas were added to the planning area. In total, with Indian Creek and two major tributaries, one called Sel Martin Creek and the other the East Tributary, there's almost 15 miles of stream. Population here is about 58,000. Batavia and unincorporated areas get their water supply from groundwater, but Aurora does get their water supply from the Fox River. So there's many jurisdictions, as you know, that can make management decisions that impact water quality. Again, as I noted, there's two major, the two municipalities. We have two counties. Fox Metro Water Reclamation District serves this area. And certainly, how do you get to all those homeowners, property owners, business associations do make decisions on their properties that can impact water quality. So the next slide. So our partners, Illinois EPA, of course, this is a 604B grant. It's a planning grant, and then they ultimately have plan review and final approval. CMAP is facilitating this process and writing the plan. We did form an advisory team made up of Kane and DuPage counties, the city of Aurora, Fermilab, the Fox Metro Water Reclamation District, and Deutschler Engineering, who has a lot of data. They have and they work for the Reclamation District and Aurora, so they were an important piece to help provide. So this is really kind of a technical group that I've been in more frequent contact with. The Fox River Ecosystem Partnership, we have a project webpage on their website, and they help provide outreach services through their downstream e-newsletter. Also, certainly at post-plan field trips to look at projects, hear about projects that have been done, planning updates, that type of thing. So they're actually a great source for any watershed planning. If you're looking to see who's been doing watershed plans in the Fox River and finding links to those plans, you can do visit the Fox River Ecosystem Partnership website. Without the Fox River Study Group, we wouldn't be able to do the modeling we're doing utilizing the HSPF model, and I'll touch base on that a little bit more in the next slide. But the steering committee we haven't gotten quite to that yet. You know, this all started, really started moving into this project early in 2020, and with the COVID pandemic, that kind of have put the steering committee formation on hold. But we're looking to do that in next steps, and looking to get your thoughts here later in today. So Geosyntec is our consultant utilizing the Fox River Study Group, has developed an HSPF or hydrologic simulation program Fortran for the whole Fox River watershed. So we're leveraging that to update that model for the Indian Creek watershed. And this helps kind of identify, you might say, target areas, subcatchments within the watershed where you can target best management practices. That watershed you see on the far right, that's actually Mill Creek watershed. So Geosyntec is right in the process of doing the modeling right now, so we don't have this kind of total phosphorus, you might say, loading map yet for Indian Creek. That should be coming any moment now. They're working on that as we speak. But again, this type of modeling, pollutant load modeling off the landscape for phosphorus, nitrogen, fecal coliform. We'll be doing chlorides as well for the Indian Creek watershed to see where you can focus best practices and outreach and education efforts. So my timeline I see isn't as fancy as Kelsey's, so I need to upgrade my graphics a bit. But to date, again, we've formed that kind of technical advisory team. We've had a kickoff meeting and had several meetings when we've needed their input. Again, that project webpage is up on the FREP website. That has project news and documents, including the first draft of the watershed resource inventory. Actually working on finishing up a second draft right now. What will be missing from that is one of the things we have to do yet is field data collection for the resource inventory, kind of our stream. We haven't been able to walk the stream yet to collect physical conditions data or go out and look at detention basins and look at their kind of, again, opportunities for retrofitting detention basins. So that, hope to finish that up as soon as we can get out there this spring, and hopefully have that wrapped up in the summer. But concurrently, we'll start developing the plan. Again, the kind of the nitty gritty of this plan, the big carrot is identifying those best management practices, whether those are on the ground, installed BMPs, retrofits to the environment, as well as, I'll say PP, which is our policy and planning and public information and education recommendations. And then that big piece of public engagement, which we, again, haven't done yet. Currently the final plan is due late this year, 2021. I'm thinking we might have to add a little, like 6 months to the project to be able to incorporate the required public engagement and the rest of the work. So again, that kind of piece, those stakeholders you want to reach. So we've got our technical experts, again, that A team, the advisory team, been working with them throughout the process. It's kind of like, well, okay, how about that steering committee? That's kind of the next group of folks. It might be the elected officials, some of the other environment groups, homeowners associations, business association. Is that something we should, at this point, it's like, do you go ahead and form that formal committee, again, to get more of that robust input? We'll certainly have some key interviewees as well, like as Kelsey noted, as we did for the Fox River corridor planning process. And I want to say also, kind of stepping back, each one of these watershed plans we've done has been, you've kind of gone about this differently. So this is the first time we've tried to, then we kind of have a technical committee, and then the plan was to have that other kind of additional steering committee of a broader base, doing those key interviews, and then, you know, typically having our kind of general public open houses type of things. But since we haven't been able to meet in person, that stuff hasn't, with the engaging, we haven't been able to get to that piece yet. So that's kind of where I was. I think the next slide might just be a kind of yes. Well, again, through the A team, the advisory team, we have gotten some great input, a kind of their vision for the future, other folks to talk with, their issues of concerns. But again, the next slide, kind of thinking about that steering committee, you know, getting that broader base of input from more folks who have jurisdiction in some way, planning, decision making, information, that type of thing. I think the next slide just shows, you know, you can kind of think of all the different kinds of people to get involved, who represent different groups and organizations, the general public. It can kind of be mind-boggling at times, but certainly in these watershed plans, you want the buy-in from a broad base of people who make the decisions and the public to be generally supportive of the process. So that brings me to kind of asking the committee here, you know, as we've worked virtually, your thoughts and experiences that you've had in, you know, engaging the public, what's worked, what hasn't, you know, should I go ahead and form that formal steering committee, or just kind of keep it at the interview level? You know, it's kind of, I'm kind of, you know, kind of juggling all these ideas. So any thoughts that you folks have would be greatly appreciated.
Well,
there been,
hey, Holly, it's Sean. Since I used to also do this for a living too, I mean, I think honestly, as you know, probably the identifying that steering committee and working with the folks, quite frankly, who get paid to do this on their day-to-day basis, whose job it is, probably the most meaningful way to get started if you want to start getting that community engagement. And then having, you know, obviously now, it's been a while since I did Watershed Planning, but there's a lot more ways to get to people through social media, through websites, through email newsletters, all those sorts of things, to then have those groups, the people who get paid every day to do the work, actually share the information with their constituents and get them then engaged. And
there's like a web.
Yeah, exactly. I think it makes sense to start the steering committee with the folks who, you know, do this on a day-to-day basis and are thinking about it, and then help them pull in their stakeholders and their constituents.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think certainly in Aurora, in this area, sorry, my dog is guarding the house. Pulling in, I think the aldermen in the city of Aurora are certainly one of those key people to engage. You know, have there been any particular, you know, besides social media? I know we've tried, you know, here we're using GoToMeeting. Is Zoom a better platform for reaching the public? Do you think, you know, more of the public is familiar with Zoom than kind of using a GoToMeeting platform? Or maybe there's some other ones out there that
I would say yes. Zoom is probably more widely available. Most people have done some sort of Zoom get together with family members or whatever, you know, over the last 9 months now. And I think that's going to be more widely available and more intuitive. You know, for folks, it's also a little bit more intuitive and user friendly. I think this is good for this kind of formal committee structure, GoToMeeting, but for that maybe informal or less formal engagement, I think Zoom is probably a better choice.
Good, thank you. Good point.
Yeah, and Holly, I think it'll be interesting to see how using the new CMAP engagement tools that we have, I mean, we have the ability to have a website built out with forums, maps for people to identify problem areas. You could pre-record presentations and get viewing that way. I know that we're all, through our LTA projects, just like stepping into that world and hoping for the best. I mean, I would hope that this would open up the participation to a broader range of people. And you may find that across an area this big, that is really your best way to get broader engagement is through online formats.
I know this area too, I think has a large kind of Hispanic community too. So, using those networks, having to find those networks to reach out to them too, to make sure these different groups are engaged, I think will be a thing I need to be aware of.
And I think going through some, if you have past planning efforts that have taken place in the same area, like I know we did a downtown Aurora plan. I don't know how close that comes to your study area, but if there are connections that were made through that planning process, or, we have members of our staff who've worked in the city of Aurora, using people who have already become trusted partners in that community to engage some of the same stakeholders in a new planning activity, I think can be one way to kind of, open the door.
I've got some people to talk to.
Going back to the, sorry. So I would just wanted to add that Zoom does have limitations, and people are familiar with it, but I believe, and I'm working from memory here, it is out at 100 people. It would be fantastic to get that many people from the public, but just looking at the size of how many people you want to reach out to, you may have to go with a different format.
You could actually increase the amount of people that could attend a meeting to, it's limited, like you said, it's 100, but then it's also, you could get a license for 500. I think it goes up to 1,000, maybe even higher than that.
Oh, but
Right.
yeah, I wasn't aware of that.
Yes, Zoom is too, is because, like folks have mentioned, it's the most familiar video software program out there. And we're going to be doing a meeting on Monday, and that's what we're going to be using as well. So that's the one positive to it. It does have limitations, like you said, but it's the most popular program out there.
Holly, this is Martha Dooley from Schaumburg, and sometimes when there are organizations that are doing some virtual meetings or things that you might be doing to gather people that are interested in the project, they'll ask us if they can put it on our municipal calendar on our website and if we can help promote it. So that might be an option.
Right, municipal calendars, good.
And, Holly, just so you see it, I want to call attention to a couple of comments that were put in the chat. Edith mentioned that she's found that interactive polls help improve participation in online meetings. So using something like Mentimeter during your meeting to engage people. And she also mentioned the engaged citizen sustainability commissions in Aurora and Batavia. Edith, feel free to expand on that if you'd like to. Thanks for those comments.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Sure. So just on the sustainability commissions, if you're tapping the municipalities and you're getting staff or elected officials, it's probably also worth asking for those sustainability commissions because they've already got, outreach into the communities and different leaders. So they'll pull in different interest groups. In Batavia, I know that the alderwoman now, used to be the chair of that, super engaged. She's really active in, got her areas of interest in biking. The Aurora Sustainability Commission also super engaged, and they just represent a really good diversity. So you might specifically ask the civic leadership to okay participation in that, and I think that'll just give you people who have time, care a lot, and willing to participate in this planning effort.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Also, is there a little bit of Naperville You said it was unincorporated. Do you have some Naperville homeowner associations?
The border, there's no incorporated Naperville.
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting group. If you find yourself not able to get a homeowners association, it's called the Naperville Confederation of Homeowners Associations. And there are hundreds of homeowners associations. So it's a really good way to try to get to that leadership because they can be really hard to find.
That's for sure.
Great, thanks, Edith. Anyone have any final comments, questions, suggestions for Holly? In the interest of time, we've got just a couple minutes left. I think there's a comment about Google Meets that people with kids are familiar with because of online teaching. Although Ted does say that people have problems with video, and that's been my experience is that it's a big bandwidth hog, and so it really is challenging to use. Any other final comments or questions for Holly or suggestions?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Holly. Appreciate it. All right. Next on the agenda, any other business? Is there any other business before the committee? All right. Hearing none, we'll move on to public comment. Brian or Kate, were there any comments received in writing before taking any verbal comments prior to today's meeting?
No, there were not, Sean.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Anyone on the committee have any public comments or anyone from the public? All right, hearing none. Our next meeting then is the joint meeting with the Economic Development Committee on Monday, March 22nd at 9:30. And with that, I would adjourn to the meeting of the E&R Committee. So thank you, everyone. Have a great January and February, and we'll talk to you in March.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy New Year. Bye, everyone.